By June 2006, MySpace had become the most visited website in the United States, surpassing Google. Over 115 million users were creating and customizing profiles, sharing content, and connecting with friends. 2 years later, Facebook had overtaken MySpace as the world's largest social network. The standard explanation focuses on News Corp. News Corporation acquired MySpace for $580 million in 2005. This led to the introduction of a number of new features that destroyed the user experience that made MySpace so popular in the first place. That explanation is partially accurate. It is also insufficient because it places the blame entirely on a single acquisition decision and entirely after the fact. And it misses the specific product decisions and organizational dynamics that made MySpace structurally vulnerable before News Corp arrived, and that made the company structurally unable to respond to Facebook after it did. There are 3 separate problems in the MySpace story, and conflating them produces a lesson that is considerably less useful than separating them. The first problem predates the acquisition. The second is specific to the acquisition. The third is the competitive product decision that changed the landscape in a way that MySpace couldn't follow. Understanding all 3, and in the right sequence, is what makes this case actually instructive. The HTML customization that made MySpace distinctive was itself an accident. A developer named Ton Nguyen, rebuilding the platform quickly in a language he knew, forgot to turn on a feature that prevented end users from adding HTML into forms. The mistake allowed users to build colorful backgrounds and load them onto their MySpace pages. Once discovered, the MySpace team considered fixing the error. They decided to keep it. The accidental feature became the platform's defining characteristic: user customization at a level no competitor was offering. This is where the first problem originates. The customization was not designed as part of a coherent product architecture. It was an accident that became policy. The result was a code base that, as rapid early iteration without architectural discipline, resulted in a brittle system that was hard to refactor. The pages became, by multiple internal accounts, what MySpace engineers themselves called a massive spaghetti ball mess. The customization that drove user engagement also made the platform progressively harder to maintain, harder to scale, and harder to evolve. Custom code in user profiles, long tolerated as part of the platform's personality, made performance even worse. Instead of rebuilding core systems, leadership layered new features onto aging infrastructure. The result was a platform that felt increasingly unstable. This problem existed before News Corp. The acquisition compounded it by adding advertising pressure to a platform that was already structurally fragile. But the structural fragility was not News Corp's creation. Have you ever watched an accidental product feature become the thing the product was built around, and then become the reason the product couldn't evolve? Leave a comment. Facebook launched in January 2004 and was only available to college students and teens until September 2006. After it opened itself up to the wider population, its growth literally exploded. Facebook's design philosophy was the opposite of MySpace's in almost every dimension. No custom HTML, standardized profiles, real names required. Facebook focused on real personal information and social connections, leveraging a genuine network effect, starting with college communities. The feature that changed the competitive dynamic was the news feed, launched in September 2006. While the feature was initially met with protest, it ultimately proved to be the key innovation that drove engagement on Facebook and allowed it to become the world's most popular social network. The newsfeed concept slowly changed the dynamic of what social media looked like throughout the ecosystem. Rather than being centered on the individual user, suddenly social media users became focused on the network as a whole. This shift, from a spatial model you visit profiles to a temporal model you read a stream, was a fundamental change in what social networking was for. MySpace's architecture had been built for the spatial model. The newsfeed required clean, standardized data from every profile, data that was accessible on Facebook's controlled architecture and architecturally unavailable on MySpace's customizable, brittle codebase. Sean Parker noted, There was a period of time where if they had just copied Facebook rapidly, I think they would have been Facebook. The network effects, the scale effects were enormous, so much power there. If the specific mechanism, how a product built on an architectural accident, could not evolve to match a competitor whose architecture was designed for the product evolution that followed, is what makes this channel worth your time. The like is the direct signal. MySpace, once driven by fast iteration and user creativity, now found itself under corporate expectations that prized rapid monetization over long-term development. The pressure to generate revenue led to a relentless push for ads. Pages became cluttered, heavy, and slow to load. MySpace generated an estimated $800 million in annual revenue at its peak. But this revenue was heavily tied to page views and ad inventory, not to long-term user satisfaction or platform resilience. Once inside News Corp, MySpace became a key digital revenue driver. Meanwhile, Facebook, still founder-led and venture-backed, made bold product bets, newsfeed platform, real-name policy enforcement, that improved user engagement even when initially unpopular. The musicians and bands who had made MySpace culturally credible, the community that gave the platform its identity, migrated first. Musicians, once the backbone of the platform, migrated to emerging services with cleaner interfaces and better audio tools. The mainstream users followed, as they typically do when a platform's cultural anchor shifts. Facebook surpassed MySpace as the world's largest social media network in August 2008, with most of its growth coming from outside the United States. The 1,000 employees who were laid off in News Corp's restructuring and the broader community of users and artists who had invested in the platform experienced the collapse of something they had genuinely valued. The MySpace music community had been real. The customized profiles had meant something to the people who had spent hours building them. The loss was not just financial. It was the end of a specific kind of online self-expression that the platform had uniquely enabled, dismantled by a combination of architectural debt, corporate monetization pressure, and a competitor that had made a fundamentally different and ultimately more durable product decision. The MySpace case teaches 3 specific lessons that the standard News Corp acquisition failure narrative collapses into one. The first is about architectural debt. A product built on an accidental feature, rather than a designed architecture, will eventually encounter the cost of that accident in the form of technical constraints on product evolution. MySpace's customization gave it a genuine competitive advantage and simultaneously prevented it from building the features that would have allowed it to compete with Facebook's newsfeed. The second is about the difference between monetization and product investment. MySpace's revenue was heavily tied to page views and ad inventory, not to long-term user satisfaction. Facebook spent the same period building product. The divergence in those investment choices determined the divergence in outcomes. The third is about the specific moment of architectural lock-in, the point at which the product decisions that had been made make a different competitive strategy unavailable. For MySpace, that point was probably 2006, when the news feed launched on Facebook's clean architecture, and MySpace's codebase made a comparable feature structurally impossible to build at the pace the competitive moment required. The practical thing. For any product with a growing user base, identify the architectural decisions being made today that will define what product decisions are available in 3 to 5 years. The architectural commitment that enables current competitive differentiation may be the commitment that prevents future product evolution. That analysis is available in real time. It almost never gets done until the constraint is experienced as a crisis rather than anticipated as a risk. This content was developed with the support of artificial intelligence tools and underwent human review, editorial curation, and approval before publication. The analysis presented here is strictly educational and philosophical in nature, grounded in behavioral psychology and classical Stoicism.